Hello and welcome to Make It Happen with Will Polston. I'm Will Polston. This is episode number 14 and we're going to be talking about dissolving fear. Now, before we get into fear and what fear is about and how you can overcome fear, I've got a question for you. The question is, what state are you living in? What state are you living in? Now, we've got a 2 million year old organ in our bodies that we refer to as the brain that's always looking for what's wrong, what can hurt us, and we're looking for that because it's designed to do that for us. It's designed to enable us to survive, and it's looking for these threats so we can either fight it or take flight from it. And if you and I leave this ancient survival bit of hardware to run the show, the chances of us enjoying life are very, very slim. And what will happen is an undirected mind will operate naturally in survival mode, constantly looking for threats, identifying those threats, magnifying those threats to our well-being. And the result is a life that's filled with stress and anxiety. And I'm sure not only do I not want to live that, but I'm sure you don't want either. And if you think logically about it, I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast, you've got a smartphone or you've got a computer, and that bit of hardware that you've got, you upgrade the software regularly. You know, if you've got a PC, you're not running it on Windows 95 because if you did, it wouldn't work properly. Yet, for some reason, when it comes to our minds, so many of us don't upgrade the software that we're running on, which ultimately is our mindset. And the reason that so many people live in this way is because it's the path of least resistance. They make unconscious decisions based on habit and on conditioning, and they're constantly at the mercy of their own minds. And they'll just assume that it's part of an inevitable part of life to get frustrated and get stressed and get sad and get angry, and in other words, live in what I call a suffering state. Now, I'm pleased to tell you that if you are one of those people, there is another path, one that involves directing your thoughts so that your mind does your bidding and not the other way round. So before we go any further, let me just explain what the difference are between the two states that I've referred to, sort of a beautiful state and a suffering state. So a beautiful state is when you feel love, you feel joy, when you feel gratitude, when you feel awe, when you feel playfulness, ease, creativity, drive, caring, growth, curiosity, appreciation. They're all beautiful state emotions. And in this state, you know exactly what to do. You know to do the right thing. In this state, your spirit and your heart are alive. And the real best parts of you come out. And nothing feels like a problem. Everything flows. You feel no frustration or fear. You're just in harmony with your true essence. Now, a suffering state, on the other hand, is when you're feeling stressed out, when you're feeling worried, when you're feeling frustrated, when you're feeling angry, when you're feeling depressed, irritable, overwhelmed, resentful, or fearful. When you're feeling those emotions, you're in a suffering state. And we've all experienced these and countless other negative emotions, even if we don't necessarily admit it. We don't want to think that we're a negative person per se, but we've all achieved them. And most achievers, which I'm sure you are, if you're listening to this podcast, you're an achiever, they'd much prefer to say they get stressed. You know, they say, yeah, if I was to ask most high achievers, do you get fearful? They go, no, I don't get fearful, I don't get scared. But if I was to ask them, they get stressed, they'd say yes. But stress is just the achiever's word for fear. And if I was to follow your stress to its source, it will lead me to your greatest fear. Now, all fears come from three triggers, which is loss of love, less of love, or never having love. They're the triggers. And everyone has their own sort of favourite flavour of suffering. So my question to you as you're listening to this right now is, what's your favourite flavour of suffering? What energy zapping emotion do you indulge in the most? Is it sadness? Is it frustration? Is it anger? Is it despair? Is it self-pity, jealousy, worry? I mean, the specific details don't really matter too much because they're all states of suffering. And all this suffering is just really the end result of an undirected mind that's hell-bent on looking for these problems, which, like I say, is what your brain is programmed to look for. So if you just think for a moment about a situation at some point in the recent past that's caused you some sort of pain or suffering, a time when you felt angry or frustrated or worried or overwhelmed. When you feel emotions like these, your sense of suffering is caused by your mind engaging in one or more of the patterns of perception. And consciously or unconsciously, you're focused on creating these triggers that I referred to earlier. So like I say, loss, less, or never. So when you focus on loss, you become convinced that a particular problem has caused or will cause you to lose something that you value. So for example, if you've had conflict with your spouse and it leaves you feeling that you've lost love or lost respect, but it doesn't have to be something someone else did or failed to do that caused you to feel that sense or that perception of the sense of loss. The sense of loss can also be triggered by something that you've not done or that you did or failed to do. So for example, you might have procrastinated, so now you've lost an opportunity that was there. So whenever we believe in the illusion of loss, we suffer. Now the next trigger is less. So when you focus on the idea that you have less of something, you'll suffer. So for example, you might become convinced that because a situation has occurred or a person has acted in a certain way, you'll have less joy or less money or less success, or some other painful consequence. Once again, this can be triggered by what you do or others do or what you fail to do. The third trigger is never. So when you focus on the idea of becoming consumed by a belief that you'll never have something that you value, such as love or joy or respect or wealth or a particular opportunity, you're doomed to suffer. You'll never be happy. You'll never become the person you want to be. This pattern of perception is just a surefire way to experience pain. Now, the thing you've got to understand is the mind is always trying to trick you into a survival mindset. Okay? And again, I'll just give you an example of this. Take an illness or an injury or something that your sibling did. You might believe that you're never going to get over it. Now, these patterns of focus account for most, if not all, of suffering. And you know what's really crazy is it doesn't matter if the problem is real or not. It could be something that you just made up in your head. Whatever you focus on, you feel, regardless of whether it's actually happened or not. So just take an example. If you ever had an experience of thinking that a friend did something horrible to you and you become really angry and really upset only to discover that you were completely wrong and the person didn't deserve that blame whatsoever. In the midst of all of your suffering, when all of those negative emotions were swirling around inside you, the reality of the actuality didn't matter. Your reality you created was because you focused all your feelings. Your focus created all of those feelings, and your suffering is caused by focusing or obsessing about ourselves and, like I say, what we might lose, what we have less of, or we never have. But the good news is once you're aware of what those patterns of focus are, you can change them. And as a result of that, you're able to free yourself from these habits of suffering. And it all starts with the realization that involves a conscious choice, a choice to make a different decision. So let's move into fear. So fear ultimately stops us moving forward. You know, it stops us moving forward. It stops us in our tracks. It stops us doing the things that we really want to do. And fear can destroy us psychologically. It can paralyze us from taking action. And we all have experienced fear in some context of our lives, whether that be fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of success. Like an example would be, how can I handle the pressure and continue to deliver at a high level? Or the fear of love, or losing love, or the fear of being alone, or the fear of the unknown. Most of us feel a combination of these fears over the course of our lives because, as we've already spoken about, it's hardwired. It's hardwired into us. And the purpose of it is to enable us to survive. So what I want to share with you in this episode as we unravel this is how we can use fear instead of fear using you. So there's, like I say, lots of variations, but there's only two fears that we're actually born with, and that's the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. And when you sort of unravel this and really open this up, what we actually find out is that there's only ever really two fears, and that's the fear that the fear of loss of what you seek, and the fear of gaining what you want to avoid. So if you break it down, if you break fears down, so we spoke about the triggers, but when we get really clear and we break it down, there's only ever these two things: the fear of loss of what you seek, or the fear of gaining what you are trying to avoid. Here is an assumption, and it's an assumption that you're about to experience in the future through your senses or through your imagination more pain than pleasure, more loss than gain, more negative than positive from someone or yourself, all of which are illusions. And when I first heard this, I thought, no, this can't possibly be true, but it is. The fears that we experience are because it's an illusion. It's a lopsided view that we're experiencing. It's a perception of ours, because the universe is always providing loving balance. And knowing this information puts you in a really powerful position, because whatever fear you're experiencing, you have the choice to break through or break down, and it does become a choice. And what I want to share with you is the process of how you can ensure that you always break through so that you don't break down. Now, if you break down, that's because you're listening to your fearful self. You're in that suffering state. If you break through, it's because you've listened to your empowered and masterful self, your higher self, if you like. And yeah, there's always going to be fears in your life. And fear ultimately means that you're growing. It's a signal that you're challenging yourself beyond your comfort zone. And your fear is a feedback response to ensure that you're actually setting more congruent and inspiring objectives as well. But just talking about comfort zone, so a lot of people think that they're going to go straight from their comfort zone to their panic zone. You know, they step out of that comfort zone and that's it. But what I want you to consider the possibility is that there's actually three zones. There's your comfort zone, there's your stretch zone, and then there's your panic zone. Now, if you could imagine an elastic band for a minute, if you have an elastic band in its usual state, what use does it have? Very, very little. I mean, you can swing it around your finger when you're on the phone to keep yourself occupied, but very, very little. As soon as we put it under tension, all of a sudden it has lots of uses. It has lots of uses. You can hold stuff with it. You can fire it at people. You can use it to move as well. If you put an elastic band under tension, let it go, it will move. And that's how we can use this fear. We can use fear to be able to move you forward and enable you to progress. Now, I'm the same as you. I have fears almost every day, but I know that my fears are incomplete perceptions or incomplete views of what's actually happening, and they're offering me feedback to where I'm incongruent or where I have unrealistic expectations. So I identify my fears, I ask myself better questions around those fears, I'm able to bring them back into balance, and then I can choose to utilize that feedback and choose not to do something, or I can choose to walk through the move into my stretch zone. And what I want to encourage you as a result of listening to this podcast is that you do exactly the same. So then you have a choice that you are either going to allow your fear to master you or you master it. And the real secret to living an extraordinary life, take the word extraordinary life, is to take control of the mind. And this, just by doing this, will enable you to live in a beautiful state. And that's really what I want from you as a result of listening to this particular episode. What I've come to realise, one of the most important decisions in life is, are you committed to living a fulfilled life and living in a beautiful state no matter what happens to you. Now, to put this another way is, will you commit to enjoying life, not only when everything goes your way, but also when things are going against you, when an injustice happens, when someone screws you over, when you lose something or someone that you love maybe, or when nobody seems to understand or appreciate you? Will you make that decision then? Because unless you can make that definitive decision to stop suffering and live in a beautiful state, our survival mind will create the suffering whenever our desires, expectations, or preferences are not met. And what a waste of life. Which, again, may well have been the case for you for many years up until now, but today you can make that decision to change. This is a decision that can change everything in your life starting today. It's not enough to just say, yeah, you'd like to make that change, or that your preference is to be happy. You have to own this decision. You have to do whatever it takes to make it happen. Cut off any possibility of going back and living in a suffering state. As Tony Robbins says, if you want to take the island, you've got to burn all boats on enemy shores. You have to decide that you're 100% responsible for your state. And again, take the word responsibility. Responsibility. It's your ability to respond. And it is your ability to respond to your state of mind and your experience of this life. It really does come down to you drawing a line in the sand today and declaring, I'm done with suffering. I'm going to live every day to the fullest. I'm going to find the juice, the beauty in every moment, including the ones that I don't like, because life is too short to suffer. And what I'm going to share with you in a moment is the process to dissolve that fear. So an actual process that you can work through, an 8-question process that you can work through to dissolve any fear that you have. Now, before I go into that, I just want to share something with you which could be really useful in the form of calibration versus interpretation. Now, we've got to be mindful between the difference between calibrating and interpretation. Now, calibration is noticing changes of what's actually happening. So you can notice a change in your posture or someone else's posture, a change in of voice tonality, a facial expression, a feeling, micro muscle movements. These are the actual things that happen. It's not a label that we put on something. And interpretation is when we place that meaning or that label on the changes. So for example, you could get a feeling in your stomach that you might say that you feel sick, but that same feeling might be you might feel sick if you feel nervous, but that same feeling, if you feel excited, you might label as butterflies. So a calibration is the ability to notice and measure changes with respect to a particular standard. So usually this involves comparing between two different sets of external non-verbal cues, so just what we actually see. By comparing that, what we can do is notice differences between people, places, things, different states, different behaviours, and calibrating depends on our own sensory acuity. Whereas interpretation is the meaning that we're putting on those things. So calibration is noticing the change. Interpretation is the meaning that we give it. And this is, again, so important. I tell you a quick story. A couple of years ago, I was doing a charity boxing match. And I'd been training for 8-10 weeks for this charity boxing match. And the day of the fight, I got told that I was going to be fighting a guy that was about 2 stone heavier than me, and I also got told that I was fighting with no head guard. The whole time, right up until the day of the fight, I thought I was fighting with a head guard on. So I'm in the changing room, I'm getting ready before the fight, and I'm pacing up and down like a tiger in a cage. My hands are sweating, my hands are shaking a little bit, I've got this feeling in my stomach. They're all calibrations. But the thing that I told myself, my interpretation of that was that I was excited rather than nervous. So I was pacing up and down like a tiger saying, I'm excited, because those feelings, those were the labels that I wanted to give to those feelings. And again, you have the ability to do the same. The label that you give a feeling has a huge impact on your interpretation of it. So let's get stuck into how you can dissolve the fear, how you can actually use this process to dissolve your fear and work through it. So there's 8 questions, 8 simple questions to dissolve any fear. Now, the first question is consider what you're most afraid of. So what is the thing that you're afraid of in the future, whatever that thing might be. Now what I want you to do, number 2, is come up with 20 to 50 benefits that you'd experience if this was to happen. And the way that you can use to get to these 20 or 50, which might seem a long way away, is look in the 8 key areas of life. So in your health and fitness, in your social life, in your family life, in your attitude, in your career, in your career or business, in your financial life, in terms of your own personal growth. Where would this be benefiting you? Where would this be benefiting you in terms of the primary, secondary, and tertiary benefits? So find out what the benefit is, then say, well, what's the benefit of that? And then say, what's the benefit of that? So you keep getting deeper and deeper. Then you're going to write 20 to 50 drawbacks if the thing that you fear doesn't happen. So again, what would be the drawbacks this time if the fear that that you're fearful of happening, if that doesn't happen, what are the drawbacks to that? So again, you're going to look in the 8 key areas of life. You're going to look for the primary, secondary, and tertiary drawback. So one of those examples might be you're not going to grow, you're not going to have that new experience, which means that you don't get to meet new people, so on and so forth. So you expand on those, so you get 20 to 50. Then number 4 is you recall a specific moment in your past where a fear of yours occurred. So think of a specific moment in the past where your fear occurred. Go back in your mind, go to that specific memory. That's number 5. So you're going to think of the moment, and then number 5 is you're going to go to that specific memory. You're going to see what you saw, hear what you heard, feel what you felt, and you're going to write down as number 6, 20 to 50 benefits that you got out of that experience. So when you had that fear and it happened, what were the benefits that you got? Again, look in the 8 key areas of life, the primary, secondary, and tertiary benefits. Number 7 is write down 20 to 50 drawbacks if that event hadn't occurred. So again, primary, secondary, and tertiary drawbacks in the 8 key areas of life. And then number 8 would be find out the ways in which actually experiencing what you're afraid of has helped you fulfill your highest values. If you haven't done your highest values, go back and listen to episode number 2 and go through the value determination process and how this event actually allows you to grow and become more of who you would love to be. So there's 2 things there. You're going to find out how it's helped you in fulfilling your highest values. Okay, if you were to experience this, if you were to experience what you're afraid of, how it will help you feel your highest values, and how experiencing that will enable you to grow and become more of who you want to be. So they're the 8 questions that you need to work through. This is a process that can take sort of half an hour or so, but believe me, it's worth doing. The reason it's worth doing, what it does is it neutralizes the perceived negatives of what's going on. So therefore, you can just step forward knowing that the fear not happening isn't a good thing, and the fear happening isn't a bad thing. You're creating a balance that you can just move forward without that confliction in your mind, or that block in your mind, which is ultimately the fear. So guys, I hope you found that useful. I'd love for you to let me know how you have been able to dissolve fear as a result of listening to this episode and being able to move forward and live in a beautiful state. As always, I would love for you to give us a review if you found this useful, and also feel free to join us in the Make It Happen community, which is my free Facebook group. Until next time, make it happen.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Make It Happen with Will Polston podcast. Make sure you join Will's free Facebook group, the Make It Happen community. Please support the show by subscribing on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or Google Play. Share this episode with at least one friend you think would benefit from it, and give Will a 5-star review wherever you download your podcasts. Until next time, make it happen.